Welcome to the latest episode of Cannabis Tech Talks. I'm your host, Aaron Vaughn, and on this episode, I'm joined by Brendan McKernan, co-founder and CEO of CannMed, the science-first summit that has spent the last decade bringing together researchers, clinicians, cultivators, policymakers, and industry leaders. Join the conversation June 15th to 18th in Lake Tahoe and save $300 on the Signature Summit package with code CM26CTT. Register at CannMedEvents.com. Let's get into it.
Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm super excited to learn more about what CannMed has in stock in 2026 and throughout the next couple of years.
Yeah, no, it's actually our 10th anniversary, so we're pretty excited to be hosting it this year in Lake Tahoe.
So before we get into everything, what made you decide to host in Lake Tahoe this year?
Well, I think that was, I would say that was probably intentional. CannMed's not like a lot of the other conferences you might have been to. I think a lot of the expos that we've attended are trade shows with a layer of education on top, and CannMed's really the opposite. So we really try to find venues that allow you to build a really unique experience for all the guests. And everyone stays at the same resort. Everyone has 3 sit-down meals together. So it's really highly focused on networking and trying to make a difference to advance the science and the clinical efficacy of cannabis. And Tahoe really met that criteria.
Right, yeah. And speaking to that, CannMed has always positioned itself as a science-first conference. So what kind of gap are you trying to fill? And when you launched it, what were you looking for, and how has that mission evolved? And you've held the line on clinical rigor in a space that often leans on anecdote. So can you tell me a little bit more about just sort of the general mission?
Yeah, I guess we started the summit about 10 years ago at Harvard Medical School. And back then, cannabis science and medicine really had no serious place to live. And as you said, the field really did ran on anecdotes and folklore. Now, while a lot of that might have been right, we have a lot of really brilliant scientists that are doing real work while the commercial industry around it was exploding. And we wanted to find a way to bring those two worlds together and kind of force a conversation. So our mission really hasn't changed over the years, but I think if you look at past CannMed events, I think the conversation's matured. Early CannMed was really about, establishing that cannabis science really does exist. Now the questions are getting a little bit sharper, a little bit harder. You start looking at what's the impact of the recent federal change, and how does that impact regulators, operators that are entering the space? What's the impact on neurology? What's the impact of CRISPR technology on cultivation? So I think our conference is graduating as the science evolves. What hasn't really changed is the format. As I mentioned, it's not a trade show with a little bit of education on top. We're really the complete opposite. It's a working conference where speakers present to experts who ultimately push back and don't just kind of applaud the speech. So the agenda is really built around trying to solve unanswered questions and not marketing conclusions.
Right. I really do think there is a gap for that. So I'm so glad that CannMed is filling it. So how do you maintain that standard year after year? You said the format doesn't change, but the science obviously is changing. So what defines CannMed 26? And if someone's attended before, what's going to be different this year?
Well, I think you have to kind of look back at the origins of CannMed. It really started with a man who kind of set the bar pretty high. Our founding advisor was Raphael Mechoulam. Obviously, he's the gentleman who discovered THC and characterized the endocannabinoid system. And when we built CannMed, he was very clear that he didn't want this to be a commercial pitch. He wanted a data-driven summit where every speaker had to bring something novel, something backed by evidence that could either advance the field or ultimately impact patients. And he had a really strong drive to make sure he was impacting as many patients as possible. So that's a standard he gave us, and we continue to use that today. So if I were to break that into a couple pieces, I think the first would be we do have an editorial filter. When we evaluate speakers through our third-party advisory team, they ask the same questions that Mechoulam asked us. Does this work meaningfully advance the field? and does it serve the patients? So to get to the podium, if you will, speaker slots can't be bought by sponsorship, and we don't allow marketing claims on the stage. I think the second component, it might be a little bit softer. It's sort of pure accountability. When you're in the audience, when you're dealing with folks like Stacy Gruber from Harvard Medical School, Ethan Russo, Zamira Punja, these people are used to defending the work in front of NIH study sessions. So they hold the bar pretty high when they're reviewing abstracts to make sure that this is really a novel technology that will make an impact. So we continue to kind of use those filters to see who graduates to the podium each year.
Right. I think that's a great way to do it. It's a meritocracy. And I think if you were to equate CannMed to a publication, it would be more like a peer-reviewed journal rather than a magazine, which a lot of the other events kind of are.
That's a great way to look at it. I never thought about that analogy.
Well, working in the publication space, that's how my brain is.
Right.
So you've got lots of leading researchers involved this year. I mean, the panel is just absolutely stacked. So what are they bringing to the conversation right now that feels especially relevant in 2026?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think that the roster kind of spans neurology, pharmacology, cultivation, regulatory science, and we do that intentionally. One of the challenges I saw when I came into the sector is that there's a major siloing problem, and I think it's a major drag on progress in the field because you don't have genomic researchers talking to clinicians, you don't have the cultivars talking enough with formulation scientists, or the regulators talking to anyone that actually does the science, and almost no one talks to the patients. So CannMed's job is to be the room where all those conversations collide. So when you have someone like Ethan Russo, who's a trained neurologist, that ends up at the dinner table with Zamira Punja, who's the leading plant pathologist in the space, and a couple state regulators, I think that's when you start to see progress happen. And folks start to discover problems they didn't know they had, and collaborators start to find out that problems they didn't even know existed that they can potentially solve. So I think it creates a really interesting dynamic when you have a multifaceted audience that's all trying to advance the field through their own lens.
Right. I think silos are an issue in every organization, including government. You have military intelligence organizations not working with each other, and it's all very compartmentalized. So I do think connecting the conversation between everybody in the field is very, very important. So from your vantage point, what are the most credible breakthroughs in cannabis medicine over the past year? I think this is something that everybody would like to know.
Oh boy, that's a hard list to choose from. It's the nice thing with CannMed, if you haven't, you can't afford to come to the summit. We do publish all of the videos online for free for everyone to watch for the past 10 years. So you can see a lot of the medical innovations that have happened over the past decade. But it really spans everything from oncology to neurology. Obviously, I think it started with, you're probably familiar with Charlotte Figi, which I think was the catalyst for the whole industry to open up medical cannabis. And that's led to neurologists now paying attention to cannabis. So this year we have folks presenting on ALS and other neurological disorders and the progress they're seeing in that field, which I think is fascinating. For me personally, unfortunately, my father passed away from stage 4 cancer. He was the chairman of our company, and cannabis played a massive role in his therapy. And it took a little bit of fighting with the traditional hospital system to allow him to use it. But Dana-Farber only gave him a couple months to live, and with the cannabis therapy, he outlived his diagnosis by 4 years.
Wow.
And he had no bone pain. He had no nausea. He started eating again, and he didn't know he was sick when he was on cannabis, which is, I think is, for me, that's a miracle, because I had 4 more years with my dad where I could have 4 more birthdays, 4 more conversations, 4 years that would not have happened if he just paid attention to traditional medicine. Now, did it save his life? No, but would I give those 4 years up? I mean, cannabis, made a huge impact. So I think there's so many breakthroughs to cover. It's hard to pin it down to a couple that are the biggest in the world. For me, that's a big one because I didn't have that time.
Right. No, that's incredible. It's an incredible story, and I can understand why you wanted to launch CannMed as a result of that.
Yeah, that was a big driver behind it. When our family came out of diagnostics helping kids with epilepsy, autism, and mitochondrial disease. So we would sequence their genome, find a personalized medicine. Unfortunately, most of the medicines in the traditional healthcare system weren't working. So they were turning to cannabinoids, and they didn't know if they're safe. They didn't know if they're effective, and they asked us to start building tools in that space. And as we entered the cannabis field, we started going to traditional trade shows and said, geez, we really need a scientific foundation. So we formed CannMed with Raphael Matrullum to really dig into epilepsy. And then my dad became sick. And then that really, really got us motivated to continue to push CannMed forward to try to discover and answer these questions.
Right. Yeah. And keeping in line with the conversation on patients, how close are we to true precision dosing and personalized cannabis medicine? Because it's such a versatile plant, and dosing can often be an issue. And I think it's a bespoke approach to each patient, right?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think we're moving in that direction. I do think it is a bridge that's a little bit too far today, because we came out of the world of personalized medicine, and if you look at my brother's work on the Human Genome Project, the whole intent for that project was to drive personalized medicine, sequence your genome, understand the proteome and everything around someone's genetic code, and figure out how to link that to a personalized medicine. And that does work relatively well, but there's still a lot to learn. We're still learning about the cannabis plant itself, along with the endocannabinoid genes in the human body. So I think we have to have additional research, and I think this shift to Schedule 3 will open up the funding mechanism to allow that to happen in a much easier way. To start mapping all those genes, mapping the cannabis plant and understanding the genetics of the plant, and marrying the two together. So I think there's still several years worth of research that has to happen to really fulfill that dream.
Right. Well, I think conferences like this and getting some of the greatest minds in the industry together is going to help find a solution to that. And maybe we will have personalized medicine very soon.
I certainly hope that's our goal, that's our mission. And I think Raphael Matrullum would be thrilled if that happened. He was a wonderful man. And, he was telling me stories when we got to know him that he was actually studying the cannabis plant and epilepsy back in the 60s and 70s for NIH. And he showed the impact cannabinoids had in seizure disorders, and the information was buried. He said nothing came out of it.
Right. Was that to do with Nixon and the Act of 1971?
Yeah, it just, he was dumbfounded. He said, I could save children's lives. I can make a huge impact on their well-being. And we had a ton of data coming out of Israel in the 70s, and NIH didn't do anything with it. And perhaps that was the stigma and the reefer madness, unfortunately locked it out.
Yeah, it's just insane to think that we could have these very efficacious medicines and be so much farther along at this point, 30, 40 years on, and we kind of have to pick back up from scratch.
It's frustrating. It's funny because my dad was really conservative. He didn't drink. He didn't do drugs. He's right down the middle. And when he got cancer and we moved into cannabis, he was amazed at what it did for his well-being and his quality of life. And towards the end of his life, his mind shift changed where he thought politicians should go to jail for holding these therapies back from patients that need it.
Right.
And I think you'll find that at CannMed, which is one of the things I love about it, because the community is so tight that everyone there has a personal story. Someone in their family, a friend, a loved one that has been that's dealing with a tragic situation that has been impacted by cannabis in a positive way. And the drive to be in this space is personal. It's not necessarily economic or commercial. It's they saw the potential. They want to help other people or other family members, and they're looking for solutions. And you can feel that the energy at CannMed. It's just there's a drive and something I don't know how to pinpoint, but every person I talk to about it, it's just that feeling they have that they want to make a difference in this world.
Right. They're passionate about it, and that always shines through. The authenticity and the passion always shines through.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd like to speak a little bit more about education and advocacy, and how these panels at CannMed, how this coming together of these great minds and people who are passionate then translates to policy.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think the science at this point is moving a lot faster than policy. It would be nice for the government to keep up with the patients that are suffering, because they just don't have time to wait. And from what I have seen for the past 10 years, the science is here. We know the compounds in the plant work. We don't necessarily know all the compounds and necessarily why they're working in the human body, but the potential for abuse is so relatively low. The toxicity is relatively low, that this is a plant that should be mainstream and better characterized. But when you compare it to the drugs that are on the market today, you have to scratch your head, like, why is this being held back?
True, with so many drugs with many more side effects and adverse reactions to it. Why is cannabis not being used? But we are seeing a shift there.
We are seeing a shift, and Schedule 3 will make a big difference. We're seeing, really, for the second year, regulators are coming to the summit now. For the first 5 years, everyone said no. Every politician said no. They wanted nothing to do with it, and that mind shift is changing, and we can see that happening real time. So that's encouraging to have state regulators from New York and Colorado and the Virgin Islands. They're all showing up for the summit to learn from the leading scientists and doctors on what's really happening.
Finally. So how are federal rescheduling conversations post Schedule 3 impacting research access and scientific credibility? I mean, I know you mentioned that finally you have politicians and lawmakers showing up, but what's the more tangible result?
Well, I think it will be a massive change for the industry. I mean, Schedule 1 has been the biggest barrier to cannabis research for the past 50 years. So it's made institutional review boards reluctant to even look at it. Obviously, federal funding has been cut off to universities. It forced a lot of the researchers to source products from one government entity, which didn't necessarily have the best cannabis to do research. So Schedule 3 definitely changes all that. When you look at, one of the gauges I look at is publication data. If you go back and look at publications in the 1980s, there was fewer than 2,000 cannabis papers that were published for the entire decade. In 2024 alone, there were over 4,000 published, more than 1 year than the whole decade that I grew up in. And now, if you search PubMed today, there's nearly 50,000 cannabis papers, and over 32,000 of those have been in the last decade. So the science is absolutely exploding. The question will be, can the regulatory and clinical infrastructure absorb all this information fast enough and know what to do with it?
Right. It's a lot of data to pour through, and I guess AI helps a little bit with that, right?
That's going to be a game changer. We're now using that every single day. It's amazing how quickly that technology is evolving, and the impact it will have.
Yeah, absolutely. And to have an AI database that's trained on, all of these journal entries, all of these studies, to be able to pull up something very specific, for a patient, or if policymakers have questions, about safety, they can easily pull it up based on this large database.
Yeah, I think that will make everyone will have the intelligence to make more informed decisions, hopefully a little bit faster. When we started CannMed, there was a lot of anecdotes and a lot of studies, I guess, to kind of look at patient information. But now that we have access to 50,000 cannabis papers, that I'm sure not all of them have the proper design controls in place, but there'll be correlations there that we can look at and draw conclusions to hopefully fulfill sort of the Bradfield Hill criteria for causality to show where it's working, why it's working, and what's the mechanism of action behind it. So I'm excited for the next decade. I think it will be a transformation in medicine.
Right. Yeah, I think the foundation is there, and it can only grow from there. Now we stand on the shoulders of giants who've been doing this research for, however long, all the way from, like you said, the 60s, although some of that stuff was buried. At least we have a great foundation now to build upon. So yeah, that's all great. Is there anything you'd like to add to wrap up?
No, I think, I'm excited for CannMed this year just because it's the 10th year anniversary. So, we have a great lineup of doctors. And this year we've designed the summit a little bit different in response to the change to the schedule of the drug. We're actually opening with a one plant policy. What happens if cannabis and hemp are treated the same for human consumption? What impact does that have on the operators, and how does that change your business thinking in terms of managing the new expectations? And then that actually ties into a whole series of workshops that we're lifting from other industries. So we have folks coming from the food industry, nutraceutical industry, the dietary supplement industry, talking about how they get managed and what's the impact on the cannabis industry should these rules change. So we're bringing real experts in that do this on a daily basis in orthogonal industries to hopefully educate cannabis operators on what they need to think about and what they need to prepare for in a new paradigm. So I'm excited this year because it's really a very forward-looking summit.
Yeah, I think it's the perfect approach. And I am very much looking forward to seeing you and all of the speakers in Lake Tahoe. I'm super excited. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll look out for what's next for CannMed.
Sounds great. Thank you for taking the time, and look forward to seeing you in Tahoe.